So we open up chapter 10 here by speaking about a tzaddik to whom is evil. So what this really means, tzaddik viralo, we explained, has three interpretations. Interpretation number one is tzaddik viralo, tzaddik that is he's an incomplete tzaddik because he still has some evil in him, or the animal soul still exists a little bit within him, but it doesn't even speak to him. It doesn't even bother him. He doesn't even need to fight it. Not like the Beinoni, he needs to be on a constant state of self-control. But the tzaddik is so high up that it exists, but it doesn't bother. We said it was like a sleeping dog in a room. Nothing that bothers him there. By the way, most people can't reach that level, right? Let's remind ourselves that this is called the book of Beinonim, because our goal is to reach the state of the Beinoni that, again, is in a constant state of self-control. The other interpretation that we had about tzaddik viralo is a tzaddik who still suffers. Ralo doesn't just mean evil, but he has a lot of bad or a lot of suffering, a lot of pain. And that's when that ultimate question comes of why bad things happen to good people. And then we also explain that tzaddik viralo can also be read as tzaddik verealo, which means a tzaddik, and he that which is evil has become a friend to him. How can evil become your friend? Because he harnessed the energy of evil towards the good. So he took the essence, because in every evil there's a little bit of good, and he took the little bit of good and harnessed it so that it enhances his own good, his own righteousness. That's how Ra can become Rea. That's how bad can become a friend, by taking the essence of it and channeling its good essence or its good points into good. Those were the three big ideas I think that we shared last week. Let's continue here, as you said, in the middle of page 249. Does anyone want to read? Anyone? Because it's left up to you again, Margot.
Okay. Except that because of its minuteness, it is subjugated and nullified by the good. He therefore imagines that he has driven it out and it is gone from him, all of it completely. There is no outward difference in deed, speech, or thought between a complete tzaddik and an incomplete one. A person observed to act in full conformity with the divine will might be a complete tzaddik, but he might also be an incomplete one, or even, as will be explained, not a tzaddik at all, but a Beinoni, intermediate. The difference is internal and invisible. In fact, the difference might also elude the person himself, for one cannot always know if one has achieved a complete transformation within. This the author demonstrates in chapter 1 by citing the case of Rabbah, a complete tzaddik who thought of himself as a Beinoni. Right.
Okay, just to clarify, remember in chapter 1, if you remember when we started that like 10 years ago, I don't know when it was, but chapter 1, we brought the words of the Talmud in which Rabbah says that he is a Beinoni. Now, Rabbah was one of the foremost leaders of his generation, certainly a very righteous person. And how could he say that he's a Beinoni, to the point that even his student, Abaya, came to him and said, Rabbah, if you're a Beinoni, then what does that leave us at? What level does that leave us at? We're so much, you're the highest level of the generation. If you're a Beinoni, you're just a Beinoni, and not higher than that, or tzaddik viralo and tzaddik vetovlo, as we said, an incomplete tzaddik or complete tzaddik, then we're nothing. Lo shavak chai lekol chai. You haven't left anything for us, he said. But Rabbah could have made that mistake, because essentially a person who's a Beinoni or tzaddik viralo is in complete self-control, is in complete dominance. That goodness of him is in complete dominance. And therefore, one doesn't necessarily know, I don't know, maybe it is the case with some of you on the call, that you're in complete dominance of your animal soul, that you don't really know whether you've gotten rid of it completely or not, because you don't feel it, you're in dominance. So that's why maybe he made that mistake. I just want to, before we go to next paragraph, and before I hear your comments too, and your learning and your disagreements and so on, I just want to say that it's interesting because there is a disadvantage in a way to a tzaddik, a disadvantage that doesn't necessarily exist by the Beinoni. What's the disadvantage? You may say, well, it's the ultimate level to get rid of the bad completely and to not feel it at all, whether it's a sleeping dog in the room or whether the dog isn't there at all. What's so wrong about it? The disadvantage, I think, and the Tanya speaks about this, touches upon this a little bit regarding the Beinoni, and that's the great advantage of the Beinoni, is that then we become almost detached from people, from society. And in a way, the challenge of the tzaddik is to constantly remind himself that although he may have gotten rid of his animal soul or channeled it in a good way, most people haven't. And most people still struggle with the animal soul. And he still needs to have empathy and sympathy and connection to the fight that people have, that constant battle that has all sorts of, gives birth to all sorts of emotions that he doesn't have, like regret, for example, or like even depression a little bit because of this fight. See, the tzaddik doesn't have evil, and therefore sometimes he can't relate to evil, and that becomes the struggle of the tzaddik.
I think if a person says he's a tzaddik, he's automatically disqualified because he's not humble.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. Tzaddik is the one, like Rabbi Steinsaltz would very often say, that if you think you've arrived, you're lost, right? That if you think you're a tzaddik, then you're lost, then you're not. But at the same time, right? We have to continue to be empathetic to those people. I'm just reminded of the story of the Baal Shem Tov, who was approached once by a wagon driver, and he told this story to the wagon driver. He said, look, I don't know what to do because I was on my way to your town, and unfortunately it was getting very late yesterday, Friday, before Shabbat, and my wagon got stuck in the mud, and I had to continue to dig it out of the mud and to push through. And unfortunately, I had to drive, and in order not to be left behind in the forest by myself, I had to drive the wagon on Shabbat, and I got here just after Shabbat, drove the wagon on Shabbat. The Baal Shem Tov said, well, what you have to do, if you're asking me how to repair this, what you have to do is, in your synagogue, light Shabbat candles every single Friday before Shabbat. By adding light to the world, you will have expelled the darkness that you experience. There was a chassid of the Baal Shem Tov, the name of Rabbi Michal of Zlochov. It's a very pious man, but he couldn't understand how desecrating the Shabbat can be easily fixed by lighting Shabbat candles. He just didn't understand. So he decided to go to the Baal Shem Tov himself to ask him the question, how could he have given such an easy way out for this man? And he traveled also to the Baal Shem Tov, also on a wagon, and the same thing happened to him, but in a much worse way. His wagon kept getting stuck, and he had to pull it out of the mud many, many times, to the point that he was almost not making it in time for Shabbat. And at the very last second, he was able to, despite all the suffering and all the getting stuck, he was able to get to the Baal Shem Tov. As soon as he walked into the room of the Baal Shem Tov tells him something like that. You try to pass judgment on a Jew. Do you know how much regret this person had for having to drive on Shabbat? Now that you experienced it yourself, maybe you'll feel that feeling of regret, and you'll understand that regret itself cleanses sins. And in a way, I think Michal, who was really on a high level, maybe was lacking that because he was on a high level. Sometimes we forget that people do struggle, whether Shabbat or not, doesn't matter, but struggle with the animal soul. And they forget. I think that's a disadvantage. That's the flip side that is not said here. But we have to remember that even though one may reach that level of incomplete tzaddik, everyone has their struggle. For the lower people, it's the animal soul. For the higher people, it's the empathy towards those people who have an animal soul. And that's just an important point to remember, because again, it reminds us also of our duty to be empathetic. Our duty also to recognize that as we struggle with the animal soul, so do others. And therefore, we shouldn't pass judgment. But that's just as a side note. Love to hear your comments. Otherwise, we can continue. But please feel free to speak your mind. Okay, let's continue. Nor is the difference.
Okay. Nor is the difference between an incomplete and a complete tzaddik, that one can experience negative desires, whereas the other cannot. The definition of a tzaddik, complete or otherwise, is someone who has no internal struggle. The tzaddik is a person whose godly soul has achieved a decisive victory over his animal soul. And if this has not happened, one is not a tzaddik. One does not need to be a tzaddik to be a great person, or a holy person, or to have the rivers of the scented oil awaiting one in Gan Eden, paradise. But if one has not achieved victory in one's inner battle, attaining the state of one who rules in the fear of God, one is not a tzaddik.
Right. This is an important line. One does not need to be a tzaddik to be a great person, a holy person. That's a very, very important line. I'm going to read it again. One does not need to be a tzaddik to be a great person, a holy person. Why? Because everyone has his own mission in life. And as long as I am accomplishing my mission in life, first of all, my internal mission, then I can attain greatness. I can attain being holy, holiness. Now, some people's mission, as the Tanya points out, even the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, even says, Ulai lekach nivra. Some people's mission is to be in that struggle all the time. And yes, to fall and to rise up, and to fall and to rise up, and to fall and to rise up. Almost as Winston Churchill defines success, right? So he said success is going from failure to failure without any loss of enthusiasm. But that in a way is sometimes really that person who strives to be a Beinoni. Now, specifically without that loss of enthusiasm, by going from struggle to struggle and rising up each time, one can achieve greatness. One can achieve holiness. You don't need to be a tzaddik to achieve greatness or holiness. And in fact, I'll make the argument that sometimes the greatness that a Beinoni can achieve through those struggles and through rising up each and every time with no loss of enthusiasm is actually a greatness that is higher than the greatness of a tzaddik. So greatness of a tzaddik doesn't really have much struggle. Maybe again, the struggle of empathy, like we were speaking about before. But so he's not faced with that battle every day. Person who's faced with that battle every day and nonetheless prevails, that's greatness. That's true greatness. You know, it's interesting because the word for greatness in Hebrew, and also we're speaking about holiness here, but the word for greatness in Hebrew is gadol, right? When we say that a person is great, we say Adam Gadol, he's a great person. And what's interesting is that the word gadol in Hebrew is mentioned specifically in the context, the first time it's mentioned, specifically in the context of struggle. How? Vayigdal Moshe vayetzei lechav. In Exodus, we speak about Moshe becoming big, becoming gadol, by going out to his brothers and by seeing one of his brothers, right, a Jew, being beaten by an Egyptian and deciding to step into that struggle and kill that Egyptian. That's what made him great. In which we learn that greatness comes specifically from struggle. That's the context of gadol, the first time that word appears in the Torah. That's the context, which is to teach us that what makes us great is stepping into not fleeing or even fighting, but it's stepping into that moment of struggle within or without and being victorious. That's what makes you great. Now, the tzaddik who's gotten rid of his animal soul, or again, the animal soul is sleeping, it's dormant and it doesn't bother him at all, he doesn't have that struggle, and therefore he doesn't have the opportunity to become great. It's an interesting.
Rasha could also become great, right, and holy as well.
That's right, exactly, and that's exactly what this is saying. A Rasha can become great in a way with greatness that a tzaddik can never achieve. This is why maybe Reish Lakish, who was a Talmudic sage, Mishnaic / Talmudic sage, who himself overcame tremendous inner struggles. Reish Lakish became a Talmudic sage, one of the greatest, after he was a bandit. It's a bandit, a real bandit, part of a gang. And in fact, it was Rabbi Yochanan who found him jumping from one side of the river to another. And he said to him, "Why, you have so much strength. Imagine you would invest that strength in learning Torah." He said to him, "Chilcha leoraita." And Reish Lakish said, "What's in it for me?" And Rabbi Yochanan said, "Well, you see, I'm handsome. I have a sister who's much more pretty than I am. And I might be able, if you really become a good man, I might be able to convince her to marry you.
Yeah.
So Reish Lakish gave it a try. And he gave it a try, and he did take all of his strength and invested it in Torah and became really one of the greats. Eventually, he did marry Rabbi Yochanan's sister, and he became Rabbi Yochanan's student. His teacher was his brother-in-law. And they had a very, very special and intense relationship. And at one point, Reish Lakish teaches in the Talmud, which means that in the place in which the people who do teshuvah stand, even the complete tzaddik cannot stand. Now, why? Because the Baal teshuvah, the person who did teshuvah and really worked on himself, entered into that space of struggle, which made him great, which made him gadol. And that greatness, even the tzaddik does not attain, because he doesn't have that same struggle. What makes us great is the struggle.
That story didn't end very well.
The story didn't end very well. Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan, that's right. The story didn't end. It's a heart-wrenching story. Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan one day were, just to give you an insight into it, were discussing a specific type of weapon, whether it can become impure or not, because according to Jewish law, only finished products can become impure. So a piece of wood can become impure if it's not finished, but if it's a chair, the finished product, it can become impure. And they were speaking about a specific type of weapon. And they didn't know whether it was finished or not. So Rabbi Yochanan turns to Reish Lakish and tells him, well, you were a bandit, you would know about these weapons. And Reish Lakish got so insulted because he had upgraded far, far away from that state of his of being a bandit, that it wasn't him anymore. And from that insult, he died of a heartache. And then Rabbi Yochanan subsequently died from the heartache that he received of indirectly causing this insult to Reish Lakish and causing him to die. That was the end of their lives, which is just heart-wrenching if you think about it. But again, the point is, that in a way, the people who do struggle attain a level of greatness that is way higher than the greatness that tzaddik attains.
So are people born a tzaddik?
So it's a good question. They are born with the potential of being a tzaddik. Not most people are not. Most people are not. Again, that's why this is called Sefer Shel Beinonim. The tzaddikim themselves are born with the potential of being tzaddikim, and then they develop it and they do become tzaddikim. Like Moses, like Rabbi Akiva, like Queen Esther, like you name the ones we've had in history. But most people are not born with that. Most people are born with the ability to, yes, dominate their animal soul and control it at all times. Most people are born with the potential of becoming a Beinoni, not a tzaddik. But again, the greatness of a Beinoni is sometimes even greater than the greatness of a tzaddik. The holiness, he doesn't just use the word greatness, he uses the word holiness. Holiness can be greater. And I'll share with you the story, another story from the Talmud, which shares volumes about this struggle, because the Tanya at one point says that a person who can exercise self-control, might even be in this chapter, I don't remember exactly where, but a person who exercises self-control creates a light that permeates the highest of the heavens, reaches the throne of glory, in his words. And in return, God blesses that person with abundant blessings every time we exercise self-control. But there's a great story in the Talmud. It's a terrible story, but nonetheless, a story that makes this point about this man who fell in love with this married woman who was very poor. And he wanted to have a relationship with her. And he decided to play a trick on her, a very dirty and sick trick, perverted trick if you think about it. But he said, she's poor, I have money. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lend her money that I know she won't be able to return. And that's what he did. He went and he said, look, I know you need money. I'm going to lend it to you. After 30 days, return this money. And if you can't return it, then you have to become my wife. or we have to have a relationship together, or I can do whatever I want. After 30 days, obviously, she wasn't able to return the money. He goes to her house, knocks on the door with the intention of committing this terrible act. And then as she opens the door, he realizes, gosh, this is terrible what I'm doing. So he tells her, instead of saying, you know what, just come and sleep with me, he tells her, your loan is forgiven. Don't worry, that's what I came to tell you. And he steps out. As he was walking back home in the marketplace, a rabbi comes to him, Rabbi Babrachan, I think it was, and says to him, you must have done something special today. You have a light that is shining on top of your head. I can see it. There's this aura, but it's light, this lamp that is light, it has been ignited on top of your head. And he told him the story. And he says, okay, now I understand why. But it comes to show you that two things, more, certainly more, but two things that jump out of the story is, number one, that the act of self-control creates a light that no tzaddik can create. That's number one. Number two, what it also comes to show you is a point that we've made in the past, that at the end of the day, it's your action of self-control, your actions in general, that define who you are, not your intentions. This guy, the worst of intentions, but he didn't follow them. So he's not judged by his intentions, he's judged at the end of the day by his action. And that's the way we judge too. That's what will define our lives. So that's the second point. Of course, other lessons can be learned from the story, but it just comes to show you again that this greatness that a Beinoni can achieve by controlling himself, no righteous person can achieve. Attains a level of greatness and of holiness. Again, in the words of Rabbi Steinzitz, one does not need to be a tzaddik to be a great person or a holy person, and to have rivers of scented oil awaiting one in Gan Eden, paradise. Okay. Any comments? I feel like I've been talking too much today.
Yeah, it's good.
Any comments, disagreements? Otherwise, we can continue.
Well, we're almost out of time, and I actually wanted to go back to where you started.
Yes, please, Amy, please.
If that's okay, if it's a good time to segue.
Sure.
I'm struggling with the word evil. And so I'm wondering if that's the Hebrew word. So
Right. It's a
so
great
we learn
question.
in yoga training what we learn in yoga training, what we resist will persist. And so there's we have to befriend. We have this value judgment on things, and if we can befriend it, that's actually how we transcend it. I'm not explaining it very well, but evil seems like something else to me. Right?
Good question, because
I can't help but think about World War II Germany and Hitler. Like, when we see evil, we have to do something. We really befriend evil. Did I lose you?
So that's a great question. So look, the word for evil in Hebrew, there's only one word I know of, is ra. Ra, and that's what the word we've been using, tzaddik viralo. The prophet says that we say that in our prayer. We just paraphrase it and we say, "Oseh shalom uvore." We use in our prayer we say uvore takol, but uvore tara, that God makes peace and creates evil. Ra. Now, evil is a very strong word, but it can also be translated as bad. Ra also means bad. But what this really relates to is, and that's why this prophecy is important, is that yes, there is evil in the world. There is evil, even evil within us. But we also have to remember that it's God that created it. You see, in modern thought, in Christian thought, there's a Satan that has his own independent powers that creates evil. Here in Judaism, God creates evil, Borei Tara. Which, what does that mean? That number one, that it exists. It exists in the world. There is evil, and we have to acknowledge it, and we have to fight it. There's evil in us, and we have to acknowledge it and fight it. But what it also means is that it was created by God, so it has to have some good in it. At its very root, its very essence, it has to be divine. So it's good. God created it. So the tzaddik viralo, what we were explaining, is that the tzaddik is able to go to the very root of evil and extract the goodness out of it, to make it his friend, like you said, to befriend it. Not everyone's able to do that. Sometimes evil is just too overwhelming that all we can do is just put it aside, control it, subdue it. The tzaddik viralo is able to go to the root of evil because the root of it is divine. God created it, and extract the goodness out of it, and then in a way harness that goodness to make him grow, to enhance his own goodness, his own righteousness. That's how evil is seen really on one foot. That's how evil is seen in Judaism.